I rent the upstairs unit of a skinny old house on a street that looks fine during the day and feels wrong after dark. It's one of those narrow places that seems to lean forward over the sidewalk like it's curious about you. The front steps are concrete that sweats when it's humid. There's a warped green door with 3 deadbolts that don't line up, right unless you lift and pull. At the same time, I tell myself it's character. Really, it's the kind of place that's cheap, because some things happened here, and the landlord would rather not get into it. I live alone. I work in a coding job that can be done from a laptop in the kitchen if I keep my camera off during meetings. There's a grocery store 2 blocks away, and a bar that gets loud on weekends. There's a laundromat where the machines rattle like they want to leave. The neighbors are mostly quiet, either because they're tired or because they know better. The first time I noticed the person at my doorstep, it wasn't even a person yet. It was just the feeling that someone was right outside while I was washing dishes. I turned off the water. The night pressed against the window. Streetlights threw a pale square onto the counter. I stood there, wet hands dripping, and the house hummed around me. Fridge, old pipes, the radiator even though it wasn't cold out. I could not hear footsteps. No rustle. Still, the feeling stuck to my back like a damp shirt. I walked to the door with the useless confidence of someone who thinks a peephole shows the whole world. It doesn't. I looked. The peephole turned the porch into a fisheye bubble. I saw the top step, the railing, the mailbox flag angled like a broken finger. Nothing else. I told myself I had been staring at a screen too long. I locked the deadbolts the way you lock a diary when you're a kid, knowing the lock won't stop anyone, but it makes you feel like it might. I went to bed and lay there listening to my own pulse in the pillowcase. In the morning, there were footprints on the steps. They were clear in the dust that always seems to gather there. Not muddy, not bloody. Just the kind of print that a rubber sole leaves when it presses, lifts, and goes, and the dust keeps the shape like a memory. They faced the door. The bottom step had 4, like someone had paced in place for a long time. The top step had 2, parallel. Whoever it was had stood right in front of the door and stayed there, no prints leading away. Maybe wind smudged those. Maybe it was nothing. I did what people do when they don't want to make a story out of something small. I swept. 2 days later, Mrs. Ortega from the end of the block got killed. I didn't know her well. She was retired, I think. She kept flowers in window boxes and would talk to the plants under her breath. Sometimes she waved at me with the hose in her hand. That morning I saw the police car and an ambulance parked sideways across the street. A strip of tape pinned the scene like a shirt held together by a safety pin. A cop with a round face kept turning people away. Another was bent over writing on a little pad like the old days. I stood on the sidewalk with everyone else, and we all made noises that meant, how awful, how weird. I hope it wasn't someone we know. I hope it wasn't someone like me. I found out more later from Maya, who manages the laundromat and knows everything that happens here by lunch. She told me in the low voice people switch to when they're handing you something you may not want. It wasn't a break-in, she said. The door wasn't forced. She opened it. That's what they're saying. Why would she open it? I asked. Because someone was there, Maya said. What else? That was the first time the words formed in my head together in a way that stuck. Who is waiting at my doorstep? I didn't tell Maya about the footprints. I didn't want her to look at me a certain way. I went home and checked my own deadbolts. I checked them again. I told myself the city is full of random bad things, and this was one of them. Someone knocked at an old woman's door, and she trusted the face on the other side for a second, long enough to make a mistake. Maybe it was just a robbery gone wrong. Maybe it had nothing to do with me or my steps or my sudden habit of holding my breath near the door. The second time, I heard my name spoken outside. Not shouted, not whispered. I was in the kitchen again, because I spend more time doing small chores than feels reasonable for one person. I had a dish towel in my hand and a bowl in the other. The sound came through the door like a muffled phone call. Evan? I froze, towel in my fist. That's my name. I don't have a lot of visitors. My friends text. My landlord emails and miscounts things and gets angry about imagined damages. My family lives far away and they call before they visit because we're not spontaneous with each other. Evan, the voice said again. It sounded like a man's voice, but I couldn't place it. It wasn't a neighbor I knew. There was a scrape, like a shoe twisting lightly on concrete. I put the bowl down and went to the door. I didn't open it. I looked through the peephole and saw less than you would think. The porch was as usual. The railing. The top step, no shoulder. No head. Whoever was there was standing too close to the door for the peephole to catch them. "Who is it?" I asked. Silence pressed its face against the wood. Then the voice returned, almost amused. "It's me." "I'm not opening the door to me," I said. "Say your name." "Come on," the voice said. "You know." I didn't. I felt the heat in my chest that happens when you realize your body is about to make a choice without you, either to open or to run, or to pretend the world isn't there. I pressed my palm to the deadbolts. I felt the cool metal through the skin of my hand. A dull knock came, not the neat, polite kind, more like a shoulder. The door didn't move. The voice laughed, soft. Then the steps creaked. I pulled away from the peephole for a second and then looked again. The porch was empty. I waited a minute. I opened the door. There was nobody on the steps. The street was quiet in the way it gets when something happens far away to make everyone pause. A dog barked and then didn't. On the top step, at the edge of the doormat, there was a folded sheet of printer paper. It had my name on it in block letters. I nudged it with my shoe like it might bite. It didn't. I picked it up. Inside there were 2 sentences typed in a plain font. The ink was a little faint, like the printer didn't have much left to give. "You're going to let me in eventually. Don't make me knock again." I stood there with the paper in my hand and tried to write it off as a prank. People have too much time. People think practical jokes are still something. But it's not much of a joke when someone uses your name. It's not much of a joke when the person stands so close to the door, you can hear their breath. I showed the note to Maya later. She pulled her lips into a straight line and nodded like she had been waiting for this. "You should show the police," she said. "What will they do?" I asked. "They'll write it down," she said. "Sometimes writing it down is enough to shake something loose." I went back home instead. I put the note in the drawer where I keep spoons I don't use. I started to think about other apartments, other neighborhoods, other versions of my life where the door is just a door. That night I slept on the couch because I wanted to be closer to the door and far from it at the same time. My dreams were the kind where your body can't run. I woke up, and the room had that color it gets when it's not really morning yet. Just the idea of morning. I checked the door. Everything was the same except for the smell. It was a sour smell, like a freezer that was unplugged and closed up, except not exactly that. It was the smell of the hallway in a hospital you don't want to walk down. I opened the door. The smell swelled. On the top step, at the right edge, there was a smear of something dark. Not fresh, not bright. I don't want to make it colorful for you. It was what it was, and I knew what it was without making the words in my head. I cleaned it with bleach and paper towels and told myself a stray cat had caught something and eaten it right there. A reasonable thing. A boring thing. 2 blocks away, a delivery driver was found in his van with the engine still running and the radio on. People said he had a family photo clipped to the sun visor. People said he lived outside the city and had been saving for a vacation. People say a lot when they're scared. I walked by that block and looked without stopping. The van was gone by then. The tape was up. A woman in a suit knelt and pointed, and the cop with the round face from before rubbed his forehead with 2 fingers. It started to spread without a shape. Little things that seemed like noise. Once, when I came home, the deadbolts were set differently than how I leave them. Like someone had opened the door and closed it, and tried to put my life back exactly where it was. Once, the mat was flipped. Once, a cigarette butt lay on the second step, and I don't smoke, and neither do my neighbors, and the brand name was scraped off, and I couldn't tell anything from it except that someone had stood there long enough to burn 4/5 of it down. I thought about cameras. I thought about alarms. I thought about friends I could ask to stay over. And then I remembered that I act like I'm good at being alone until it's time to prove it. I called the non-emergency line and told a tired voice about the note and the smell and the cigarette. The voice told me to keep a record of everything. Start a notebook, she said. Date, time, what you saw. She said there wasn't much else to do until something happened that fit more cleanly into the forms they use. I thanked her for the call even though I wanted to say something else. Something like, okay, but it already feels like something is happening and I live here. I bought a notebook at the corner store. The cover said ideas in silver letters. I started with the footprints, even though that was days before, and I guessed the date I wrote down the voice. I copied the note by hand so I could read it again without opening the drawer. I wrote about the smell and the cigarette and the mat. I wrote down my own reactions, because the woman on the phone had said to be specific, and I am good at following instructions. I wrote that I was starting to sleep in a way that didn't feel like sleep. Things drifted along. The news got loud for a week because someone else in the neighborhood was found in their doorway. A landlord in an old coat told a reporter that the tenant had always paid on time. A coworker messaged me a link like it was gossip, sent a shocked emoji, and then asked if I was still coming to the team off-site next month. I said yes. It was easier to say yes to something far away than to say no to the thing outside my door that was close enough to fog the peephole if it wanted. One evening I took the trash out late. I don't like going down the steps after dark now, but I was tired of sitting in my own habits. The alley behind the house has a motion light that comes on late and leaves early. I hauled the bag to the bin, and the light lit me in the middle like I was on a stage. Someone said my name from the front of the house. I froze. The motion light hummed and then shut off, leaving me in the dark. "Evan," the voice said, mild, like a neighbor bumping into you in the stairwell. "You're home late." The bag sagged in my hand. I dropped it. It burst a little and something soft thumped against my shoe. I didn't move. I didn't answer. It felt important not to answer. The voice didn't call again. The house made one of its settling noises, a long sigh. I went back inside and sat on the floor for a while because my legs had decided the couch was too far. The next morning there was another note. I didn't see it until I stepped on it. The paper folded under my heel with a crinkling sound. I picked it up and unfolded it in the shadow of the door. The sentences were shorter this time. "I don't want to wait forever. Let's make this easy for both of us." I laughed out loud. I didn't mean to. The sound came out like a cough. Easy. Like I had some job I was avoiding. I wrote it down in the notebook and underlined it. I showed no one. Maya asked me for updates and I shrugged. I didn't want to put my fear into her hands again, because then it would be real in two minds. A week later, Maya didn't open the laundromat. She always opens it. She's the person who is at work when the world is blurry, and you're not sure where your day is yet. The closed sign was still in the window after lunch. People stood outside holding bags and staring in like staring would unlock it. Someone said maybe she was sick. Someone else said her cousin was visiting out of town, and she had mentioned taking a day. I walked around the block to the back door that employees use. The knob had a scratch around it. That was all. The news that night didn't mention her by name. It mentioned the laundromat. The anchor said the words in a careful order. I sat on the floor again. I made a list in the notebook of all the people who might be next. I drew a box around my own name, like that would hold it in place. I started leaving my porch light on from sunset to dawn. It throws a dull cone that paints the steps the same color no matter what happens there. The first night I left it on. The bulb burned out. I replaced it, and it burned out again. The third bulb lasted. It might have been a coincidence, but it didn't feel like one. The light reduced the world to that cone, and the person waiting like that. I think the dark is a wide country. Light makes a small room and invites you to pay attention to the door. On a Thursday, I woke up to knocking. That wasn't from the door. It was from downstairs. Ground floor is another unit, but no one has rented it in months. The landlord says he's renovating. The work never seems to get done. The knocking was steady, like someone building furniture the wrong way. I stepped carefully so the floorboards wouldn't talk. I put my ear to the vent fan in the bathroom because it runs along the wall we share with downstairs. The knocking got louder, closer. Then it stopped. I went to the front window, peeled the curtain. A car idled across the street with no one in it. The exhaust made a tiny ghost that drifted away and came back. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail because that's what I do when I don't owe anybody anything. I answered. "Evan?" the voice said. It was the same voice from the doorstep, just less muffled by wood. It had that tone people use when they think they know you better than they do. "You're up." My mouth went dry. "Who is this?" "You don't have to be scared," the voice said. "I know you don't like to make a scene. We can do this quietly." "Do what?" "You'll open the door," he said. "You'll look me in the face. We'll see if you're who I think you are." I almost hung up. but I wanted to keep him talking the way you keep a match alive by cupping it with your palm. "Who do you think I am?" He chuckled, and it was the same soft laugh I'd heard the first time. "You'll see." The call ended. My phone gave me the click it gives when a call isn't yours anymore. I called the number back. Straight to nothing. I stood in the kitchen and listened for anything that would tell me where he was. The house settled again. The fridge hummed. Somewhere outside, a bus sighed to a stop and then pulled away. I wrote down the call in the notebook. I took a photo of the page and emailed it to myself because I wanted it somewhere else too, in case of fire or theft, or the kind of loss that follows you through every room in your house. I checked the locks. I made coffee I didn't drink. I put a chair under the doorknob even though I know that trick doesn't really work with my door. That afternoon, the cop with the round face knocked on my door. He introduced himself like we were at a block party. He asked if he could come in. I let him, because at that point, anyone who knocked and said their name could come in. He looked at the locks. He looked at the peephole. He wrote in his little pad. He asked me to tell him the whole thing from the beginning. And I did, leaving out the parts where I had convinced myself nothing was happening. I showed him the notes. I showed him the notebook. He read slowly, lips moving a little. He nodded at the line about Maya and paused at the part about the smell. "We have a mantra," he said. "If something seems off, it usually is." "That's not very comforting," I said. "It's not supposed to be," he said. "It's supposed to make you call us sooner." He gave me his card. He told me to call next time I thought the person was outside, even if I wasn't sure. He said they were working other angles. He didn't tell me what angles. He asked if I had enemies. I told him I'm too boring for enemies. He asked if I had exes who might want to scare me. I told him my exes prefer to forget. He stood and did a small stretch. "Keep the light on," he said. Sometimes that's enough to make someone pick a different door. "What if they only want mine?" I asked. "Then we make it harder," he said. He left. The house felt emptier after he was gone. I stayed home that weekend. The doorstep person didn't show. Or they did, and I didn't catch it. Sometimes the absence of something becomes its own presence. I found myself standing at the peephole more often because I wanted to see nothing and call it a victory. I slept better 2 nights in a row and thought maybe the city had found another place to be strange in. I went out for groceries on Sunday, midday. When the street is full of people and noise and hope, I came back with a bag of eggs and milk and a loaf of bread that tastes like nothing but takes up space in the kitchen. There was a new thing on the top step. Not a note. It was a small key, old-fashioned, not to my door. It lay on its side like a fish that had decided not to swim anymore. I picked it up with my fingers pinched at the end. It was warm from the sun. The head had a little tag with a number stamped into it. 12. That made no sense to me. I looked up and down the street to see if anyone else had found a key at their steps. I saw a teenager with headphones mouth the words to a song, and a woman with a stroller stop and start again. Nobody else was holding their breath over metal. I took the key inside and put it on the kitchen table. I stared at it. It stared back the way objects do when you project thoughts into them. I checked my mailbox. Junk, bill, flyer for a pizza place that had already closed and reopened under a new name. I kept checking for another hour like the mailman had a second shift. At dusk, the phone rang again. "You found it," the voice said. No greeting. Just that. "Good." "What is it to?" I asked. "You'll find out," he said. "I like that you wrote everything down. You're organized. That makes this cleaner." "Cleaner than what?" I asked. "Cleaner than messing around," he said. "Look, I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to tell you when to open the door. Not now. Soon. I'll be waiting. It won't take long." I felt something rise in me I didn't expect. Anger. Not white-hot or heroic. Just the kind that decides it has had enough. "No," I said. "I won't open it." Another soft laugh. "You always have, Evan. You've been opening doors since you were a kid. You think you forget, but you don't. You know how it goes. Knock, knock. You make a choice. We all move along." "I don't know you," I said. "You will," he said, and hung up. I don't know when I started thinking of him as him. Maybe because the voice had that steady confidence men sometimes carry, even when they don't deserve it. Maybe because something in the words felt like the shape of someone I once knew. I tried to think of old classmates, old co-workers. The guy who got fired and cried in the stairwell while I kept walking because I had a meeting. I tried to think of bartenders, cashiers. That one neighbor who held the elevator doors open with his foot while he looked at his phone. No one matched. That night I dreamed the key fit every lock in the world, and the world opened to a long hallway with lights blinking at the far end. I woke up with my jaw tight and the taste of metal on my tongue. The next day, upstairs in my kitchen, the tap started to drip and then to run on its own. I hadn't touched it. The sound was strangely loud. I turned it off. It turned on again. This is not a haunted house story. This is a house with old pipes and a valve that is older. But I couldn't shake the sense that the house was being taught to behave a certain way. I shut the water at the main and made an appointment with a plumber for 2 days later. He would not come. Something would intervene. At the time, I didn't know that. I wrote Plumber Tuesday in the notebook and circled it. The cop with the round face didn't come back. I called the number on his card and left a message. He gave me a key. I said into the machine. It has 12 on it. I hung up and stared at the wall like I could see through it into the stairwell. Once, long ago, I had been locked outside my childhood house, and my mother had told me to wait on the doorstep until she got home. I sat there with my legs tight together and my backpack on my lap like a drum. The neighbor's dog stared at me through the railing and whined. A man with a clipboard walked by and asked me if my parents were home, and I told him no. And I remember how his eyes emptied for a moment like a person looking into a dark room and choosing not to step through. I didn't remember that until now. It came back all at once, like a scent. On Wednesday, the letter carrier didn't come to our side of the street. A line of empty mailboxes waited with their mouths open. I went out to look because the quiet started to feel like an accusation. Across the street, a kid touched the inside of his mailbox and then wiped his finger on his jeans. The air was heavy. I had the idea to put a note in my own box for the letter carrier. If you see anyone waiting on these steps, please call this number. I wrote it down and folded it and slid it under the clip. My hands shook a little. I went back inside. At dusk, I got a text from a number that wasn't the same as the calling number. It said, "You're going to want to be ready tonight. Don't pretend you won't be. Put the phone down. Don't call anyone. Keep your hands free. I turned the phone off. I turned it back on because that made me feel like I had done something, even though the same texts were there after. I put the phone on the table and backed away like it might go off. I drank a glass of water just to have a task my body understood. I checked that the chair was still wedged under the doorknob. And then I took the chair away because I didn't want to be the person who props furniture under a door and calls it defense. I stood where the peephole would show me in a distorted circle if someone looked in. I moved left, out of that circle. The porch light clicked on. It does that sometimes when the sensor catches a moth. It stayed on this time. My doorbell rang. I hadn't heard it in months. People don't ring doorbells anymore, not here. It's all texts and deliveries left on steps. The bell's tone was thin and old and very clear. I picked up my phone, started to dial the cop's number, then stopped. I went to the door and put my eye to the peephole. The porch looked empty, same as always, the fisheye view making the railing bend like a grin. Then a face leaned in from the side, very close. The distorted glass stretched it into something I couldn't recognize. I pulled back because seeing a face that big that close is the kind of thing your body doesn't like. I stood very still. "Evan," the voice said from the other side. "It's time. Use the key." I looked at the little key on the table, picked it up. My hand didn't feel like mine. "What does it open?" I asked. "The downstairs door," he said. "Number 12. "No one lives there," I said. "Someone does tonight," he said. "I'm waiting." My throat tightened. Why me? He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, the laugh was gone. "Because you're careful," he said. "Because you think you're invisible. Because you're the kind of person people say hello to and then can't recall when the police ask. Because you don't like to look too long at anything that hurts. Because you step over everything that isn't your problem." I almost said he was wrong. I didn't. I thought of the stairwell at my old job. I thought of the neighbor's dog. I thought of how I had cleaned the smear on the step before I had called anyone. "If I don't come down," I said, "what happens?" "You'll come down," he said. "You always do." He moved away from the peephole. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear anything. But I knew he hadn't left. The house had a way of making its silence heavy when he was near. I put the key in my pocket and left it there. I paced the kitchen until my feet knew every nail in the floor. At some point I sat on the floor again, because the floor is a kind of permission to be small and very still. I stared at the line of light under the door until it blurred. I must have closed my eyes. I opened them to the sound of something metal touching wood on the other side. A scraping. Then a click. Like a lock being tried by someone who already knows the trick. I stood. I pressed my hands against the door and felt it in my palms. The low push of someone leaning in. The deadbolts held. The doorknob twitched once, twice, as if in greeting. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He knew I was there. I stepped back. The pressure eased. The porch light cut off, and the darkness came back to the door like a friend. I waited. I don't know how long. At some point I took the key from my pocket and turned it over in my hand until the grooves pressed little half-moons into my skin. Later, when the street had gone quiet in that way it does, when everyone has given up on their plans, I opened my door and stepped out. The night was close. The air smelled like rain that was not coming. I stood at the top of the steps and listened to nothing. I closed the door behind me because the idea of it swinging open on an empty room made me feel thin. I went down slowly, one step at a time, like someone walking to a podium to read bad news. The downstairs door stood at the base of the steps. It has a small brass plate with numbers that are the address and a line break, and the unit number below. I'd never even noticed the unit number because no one uses that door. It had 12 under the address, small and precise. I had to kneel to see it. My knees popped in the quiet like someone snapping their fingers in another room. I put the key to the lock. It slid in. I turned it. The lock gave the shallow throat-clearing sound of something that hasn't worked in a while. I pushed the door. It stuck. I pushed harder with my shoulder. It moved an inch and then more. The smell hit me. Not the sour from before. Cold, wet. Something kept out of the light. My stomach rolled. I held the key tight so it wouldn't clink. "Evan," the voice said from inside. "Come on." There was no electricity downstairs, or if there was, it wasn't on. The hall was a long rectangle with my shadow hanging in it like a cutout. The only light came from the street through the doorway behind me. It made a slice on the floor. Dust hung in that slice. I stepped inside because if I didn't, I would freeze there forever and become part of the house. My eyes adjusted. The hall narrowed and turned left. The walls were close enough I could touch both with my hands if I wanted. I didn't want. I moved down the hall and a small sound came from ahead. A creak like someone moving a chair across a rug. The smell got thicker. That hospital corridor I never want to walk down was here again. Present. Specific. I stopped at the turn and waited to see if my name would come again. It didn't. I turned the corner, and there was a door at the end with a rectangle of glass at eye level that had paper taped over it from the other side. The paper moved slightly, as if breathing. My shoe hit something soft. I looked down and saw a towel rolled against the base of the door. It was damp. I looked up, and in the glass I caught a pale shape shift from one side to the other and back. Not a reflection. Something behind the paper. "Open it," he said from the other side of the door. The voice was closer now, the way it is when someone stands half a step away. "I have the key to the downstairs door," I said. "Not this one." "It's not locked," he said. "You don't lock a door like this from the hall. You lock it from inside." I don't know why I pushed. Maybe because he asked. Maybe because I felt like I had already gone too far to be saved by anything as simple as standing still. The handle turned. The door opened. The first thing I noticed was the cold. It poured out like it had been stored up for weeks. The room was long and low with no windows. A single bulb on a cord hung from the ceiling, unlit. The paper I had seen was taped to the glass as if to keep light in, not out. My eyes found shapes. A table, a chair, another chair, shelving along the wall with empty boxes stacked like bricks. In the far corner, something like a pile of blankets. I took a step forward, and the floor gave a tiny groan, like a throat trying not to speak. He was there, sitting in the chair nearest the table, legs crossed like he was waiting in a lobby. He had a hoodie on with the hood up and a cap under the hood. It was a style choice that amounted to a mask. He had gloves on. He sat very still. That was what made him feel real, not the clothes, the stillness. Some people buzz even when they're quiet. He didn't. He was the center of the room, and the room liked it. "You made it," he said. His voice was the same, but flatter in the cold. "Good." I stayed near the door. "What is this place?" "It's yours tonight," he said. "Come in. We have to talk. We have to decide." "Decide what?" "Who comes to the door?" he said. "I didn't ask to be part of this," I said. "You didn't ask before either," he said. "But you were. You are." I took another step because he didn't move, and my body couldn't stand waiting at this distance. Up close, I could see the way he held his shoulders. Relaxed. Like he was born there, I could not see his eyes under the brim of the cap. He flicked one gloved hand, and a small object slid across the table toward me. Another key. This one was newer. It shone like a coin. "There are 12, he said. "Doors, locks, people, however you like to count it. Old key to get in, new key for the next door." "I'm not playing," I said. "It's not a game," he said. "It's a chain." "What happens if I walk away?" I asked. "You won't," he said. "But if you did, you'd find one of your doors held open by a shoe, and something waiting on the other side you can't unsee." "What did you do to Maya?" I asked. My voice surprised me. I hadn't meant to ask that first. He tilted his head a little. "What do you think I did?" "I think you waited," I said. "I think you made it look like it wasn't you." "That's what doors are for," he said. "To make it look like you're not inside until you are." "Did you kill her?" I asked. I felt the word like a weight I had to move from my throat to my mouth to the air. He let out a breath. "You want the right words," he said. "You want to put them in lines so the world makes a shape you recognize. Fine. Some of them died by my hand. Some of them died because of the door they opened. None of them were accidents." I stared at him, and I tried to keep my face from showing anything. My body had started to betray me. The little tremor at the edge of the mouth. The shift of weight from foot to foot like I was in a line that wasn't moving. "Why?" I asked. "Because someone has to knock," he said. "Someone has to wait. Someone has to teach people the cost of opening. Someone has to see who we are when we're tested." "That's nonsense," I said. He shrugged. "It only sounds like nonsense if you think the world is a place where doors mean safety. They don't. They mean choice." He pointed at the new key on the table. "You're next," he said. "You're the one who decides where we go now." "I'm not like you," I said. "You don't know that yet," he said. "But you will. You've been practicing. How many times have you stood on your side of a door, listened, and still opened? How many times have you chosen the easy quiet over the messy noise? It's the same motion, Evan. It's always the same." I looked at the key like it might explain itself. "What does this one open?" I asked. "Upstairs," he said. "Not your place. The empty one across the hall. Someone moved in this afternoon. You didn't notice because you were writing in your notebook. He brought a mattress, a lamp, 2 boxes. That's all. He's young. He thinks this neighborhood is charming. He will leave his door chained but not locked. He will step out to the hall for a moment with the trash and not realize he's made an invitation of himself." I felt a small, sharp pain behind my eyes, the kind that comes when you're trying not to cry, and your body resists the order. No, I said. I came here to tell you no. You came because I was waiting at your doorstep, he said. And that's how this works. If you had ignored me, if you had called the police enough times, if you had left, maybe, but you didn't. You did what people like you always do. You wanted to see. You wanted to understand. You wanted to be the one to decide. I took a step back toward the door. He didn't follow. He didn't even turn his head. You can walk away, he said. You can leave the key on the table and go upstairs and lock your door and sleep with the light on. You can tell yourself you're still you. What happens if I take it? I asked, hating myself for the question and needing the answer. Then we'll see who's waiting at your doorstep next, he said. And this time you'll be on the other side, and you'll know how it feels to stand there and not breathe and hear a life shifting behind the wood. I thought of the faces on the street that I do not hold in my head when I climb the steps. I thought of the cop's little pad, the slow way he read. I thought of Maya unlocking the laundromat in the morning and people dropping quarters into machines like offerings. I looked at the key and then at him. Why me? I asked again. It wasn't a real question anymore. It was a way to stand still while I waited for a better self to arrive. Because you wrote everything down, he said. Because you think writing keeps things where you can see them. Because you're careful enough to be useful and quiet enough to be ignored. You chose me, I said. He spread his gloved hands. No, he said. You answered the door. Silence again. The kind that tells you the world outside is going on without you. I could feel my heartbeat everywhere. The house creaked once above us. I imagined the young man upstairs taking a box cutter to the packing tape on his boxes. I imagined a photo of someone he loves tucked in a book. I imagined the chain on his door, hooked in a loop, easy to lift. You don't have to, he said, almost kindly. There are other doors. There is always another door. I picked up the key. It lay in my palm like it had always belonged there. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement, as if we had agreed on the time and place for a meeting we both had known about for years. Good, he said. Go home. You'll know when it's right. You'll feel it in the floorboards. What about you? I asked. I'll be where I'm supposed to be, he said. Waiting. I backed out of the room. I didn't want to turn my back to him. I didn't want to be the kind of person who said he didn't want to, and then did anyway. The hallway felt longer on the way out. The air warmed inch by inch. I stepped into the night, and it wrapped around me like something familiar that I could not trust. I locked the downstairs door, felt the small click register in my fingertips, as if the house were telling me yes, that's the way. Upstairs, I closed my door and slid the deadbolts. I put the new key on the table next to the old one. I stood looking at them for a long time. I made a line in my notebook and wrote, He gave me another key. He says it opens 12. Upstairs across the hall. Young guy. Chain only. Trash out. Invitation. I put the pen down and stared at the words. It felt like a list of groceries for a meal I didn't want to cook. I slept badly. The kind of sleep where you're awake most of the time, and when you do drop under, it's into a shallow pool full of objects you can't name. I woke with my jaw clenched. Morning didn't help. Around noon, I heard movement in the hall. Boxes sliding. the kind of low laugh someone makes when they're trying not to disturb anyone. I stood with my hand on my knob and listened like a thief. The footsteps went to the stairs and down. I opened my door a slit. The new neighbor was exactly what he'd been described to be by a voice I don't want in my head. 20-something hair that looks like it's trying to be a different hair. Shoulders that haven't learned the lesson yet. He carried 2 bags of trash in one hand and a pizza box in the other that he had folded and wedged under his arm. He didn't see me. He didn't look up. He walked down with the careful carelessness of the unafraid. His door stood open behind him. The chain hung loose. The hall smelled like cardboard and the first hour in a new place. I could have called out. I could have said, "Hey, your door," and pointed like a grandfather. He would have thanked me. He would have gone back up and fixed it. He would have closed it and locked it, and then sat there on the floor among his boxes, and wondered briefly if he had just met the building's weird older guy. And the day would have gone on, and maybe the night too, or maybe not. Maybe it would have just postponed the moment. Maybe someone else's doorstep would have become the place. I didn't call out. I closed my door silently and leaned my forehead against it and counted my breaths because I needed to count something I could control. The afternoon stretched. I tried to work. My boss pinged me with a task, and I moved pixels around on a screen for an hour and felt accomplished and then empty. I ate noodles over the sink. I listened to the hall. The young neighbor moved around, humming under his breath. He had a friend over at some point, a quick burst of a laugh, and then the neutral sound of conversation. At dusk, the friend left. The hall went quiet. The chain sounded once, a small clink. The key on my table looked brighter in the low light. My porch bulb clicked on and made the front steps a stage again. My phone buzzed. A single message. "I'm at your doorstep." I didn't look through the peephole. I knew the view and I knew what I'd see, and I didn't want to feel my heart do that thing again. I turned the knob. I opened the door. The porch was empty. The street was a painting with cars. The air hung close. The message meant something else. It always did. I stepped into the hall instead. The building held its breath. Even the fridge upstairs paused between hums like it wanted to hear. I stood outside the young man's door. The chain was set, but the main lock was not. Through the crack, I could see a slice of floor with a rug shrugged halfway out of its plastic wrapping. A pair of sneakers lined up beside it. Neat. I held the key. The metal made a small print in my palm. I lifted my hand and let it fall. I lifted it again and let it hover. I listened. From inside, a kettle whistled low and then higher, the sound thin like a bird. I pictured him walking to the kitchen, flipping the switch, doing the small thing without thinking about how the small thing makes time happen. The floor under my feet shifted its sound. Not much. The house talking to itself. I felt it. The way he said I would. The pressure of a decision moving through wood and nail and up into bone. I raised my hand, and I knocked. I didn't knock like a salesman. 2 taps, flat knuckles. The chain slid, a quick metal sound. He opened the door a hand's width. He was younger than I thought up close. Freckles that would fade in winter. A little scar under his lip like a cat had caught him once. "Hey," he said. "Can I help you?" "Welcome to the building," I said. My voice sounded wrong to me, like I was acting. "Sorry to bother you. Just Keep your chain on. There's been break-ins. The landlord's useless. He glanced down at the chain and back at me. I heard about the laundromat, he said. Maya, right? Yeah. I swallowed. Keep your chain on. He nodded, nervous smile. I will. Thanks. He started to close the door. Wait, I said, before my brain approved it. Do you have a second? His eyes tightened. City rules. But he didn't close the door. I hated that. I loved it. What's up? Have you seen anyone waiting on these steps? I asked. Anyone who doesn't belong? He thought for a second. The wrong way. Eyes turned up like he was looking at a memory he wanted to look friendly. No. Why? No reason, I said, and I felt my face make a smile it didn't mean. Sorry. First week jitters. This block has a personality. We're good, he said. Thanks. He closed the door. The chain clicked. I stood there with the key in my palm and felt stupid and relieved. Back inside my place, I set the key down. I told myself that was it. I told myself I had passed a test I didn't sign up for. I stared at the door across the hall until my eyes watered, and the grain of the wood went soft. The text came 10 minutes later. Good. You care. Next time, knock for real. I typed a reply without thinking. Leave him alone. The dots appeared, patient, like a person letting me think I was in control. That's not how this goes. Open your door. I didn't. I turned my phone face down. I walked into the kitchen and opened a cabinet and closed it. I moved my keys from one hook to another. I checked the deadbolts even though the door wasn't moving. I stood there waiting for a sound that would tell me which life I was in. A scream from downstairs cut the air. Not a movie scream. A real one has an ugly tear in it, like fabric ripping in the wrong direction. Then a slam. Then silence so complete I could hear pipes and my own throat trying to swallow nothing. I ran into the hall. My neighbor's door stood open 3 inches. The chain hung like a drawn line with no sentence after it. I didn't have the new key in my pocket. It was on the table. I pushed the door with my fingers and it moved. Hello? I said, soft and stupid. The living room was a mess of boxes. A kettle screamed in the kitchen on the left, finish line high. Hello? I said again, louder this time. No answer. I turned the burner off. The neighbor, he hadn't told me his name, lay on the floor beside the rug, face down. His hand was stretched toward the door like he'd tried to draw it closed with his fingers. There wasn't much to read in the room beyond the obvious. A chair was tipped. A box had burst and a small stack of books had fanned half under the couch. There was blood, but my mind refused details it couldn't use. I've learned I can do that. Blur what will stick too hard. Call, I told myself aloud. My hands wouldn't find my phone. It wasn't on me. It was on the table in my apartment. I looked back through the open door to my door. 6 steps. An open view to anyone in the hall. I ran anyway. The kettle started crying again in the silence behind me. Inside, I grabbed the phone and dialed the cop's card number with a thumb that didn't feel like mine. It went to voicemail. I hung up and hit emergency. The operator's voice was calm. I gave the address. I said, "He's hurt," because naming the other thing would make it heavier than the call could hold. Is the attacker still there? The operator asked. I don't know, I said. He's been waiting at my doorstep for weeks. There was a pause. Sir, go somewhere safe. Officers are on the way. There was nowhere safe. I walked back into the hall because moving felt better than standing. At the top of the stairs, a shape leaned in the corner where the light doesn't reach hood. Cap. Stillness. I couldn't see his face. I knew it was him the way you know the outline of your own coat. Go home, he said, not loud. Lock up. Why him? I asked. I sounded small. Because you didn't knock, he said. And he would have opened. You told me not to knock, I said. You decided that, he said. I took a step toward him because anger felt like a handhold. You're going to be caught, I said. There are cameras, people. You can't keep doing this. He tilted his head. You sound like you're trying to talk yourself into a story with a nice ending. What do you get out of this? I asked. My voice shook. What are you trying to prove? Nothing, he said. I'm not the thesis. I'm the knock. That's it. The rest is you. Footsteps sounded on the sidewalk outside. A voice on a radio. Tires. The shape sloped away down the stairs, quiet as if the steps were teaching him how. By the time I got to the bottom landing, he was gone into the gap behind the mailboxes where an old door used to be. I didn't even know there was a gap there. All I saw was shadow, then nothing. The officers came in fast and careful. One checked me, the quick pat, the questions about who I am. The other went into the neighbor's apartment. His voice came back to the hall like he was talking through a scarf. He said a word I didn't want, and he said it like a fact. The neighbor didn't move again. They took me to my couch and asked for the story. I told them some of it. Not the basement. Not the second key. Not the way my hand had hovered in the hall. Half a knock in it like a new habit. I heard myself choosing the facts that made me small and harmless. They wrote them down. One of the officers asked about the cop with the round face. He'd been by. He hadn't followed up. He would. He didn't. They taped the door across the hall and told me to call if I remembered anything else. One of them looked at my locks, the old wood, the hole where the chain used to be on the inside. You should get a better door, he said, like he was advising me to switch to a better shampoo. The building felt hollow after they left, like someone had pulled its insides out and put them neatly on a table and walked away. I picked up the new key from my table and threw it into the sink. I didn't turn the water on. I stood there with my hands on either side of the basin and looked at the drain like it might offer a plan. My phone buzzed on the counter. A new message. You took too long. I started to type back and then stopped. I didn't want to feed the conversation. I didn't want to pretend it was anything but one voice talking at me through the holes he knew I had. Maya's sister put up a flyer at the laundromat with a photo of her where she's laughing with her head tilted back. People stuck flowers in the fence, and they wilted fast in the heat. Someone wrote a note on a paper towel and taped it to the glass. I'm sorry. I kept walking when I saw him in my head, too. I didn't sign it. I didn't know how to put my name next to that. The cop with the round face came by 2 days later. He looked worse. He didn't sit. He asked why I hadn't called when I got the second key. I lied and said I never got it. His eyes flicked to the sink. The key was gone. I'd moved it back to the table like a stage prop I was pretending not to see. Maybe he saw the imprint in the dust where it had been. Maybe he just felt the shape of it in the room. He nodded once, as if I'd told him something else I didn't hear. "We found a camera across the street that caught a guy near your steps," he said. "Hood, cap, hands in pockets. He looks at the door. He doesn't look at the camera. He knows where they are. He's been around." "Do you have a face?" I asked. He shook his head. "We'll get one." "You sound like you're trying to talk yourself into a story with a nice ending," I said without meaning to. He almost smiled. "That's my job." That night, another key. It wasn't on the step. It was inside my door, on the mat. The deadbolts were still set. The wood hadn't been marked. I stood with the key in my hand and tried to obey physics. It didn't help. The tag on this one said 12 again, but the metal was different, a different cut. Alongside it, a folded note that didn't look like his usual printer paper. This one was torn from a spiral notebook. The edges were frayed. The handwriting was neat, vertical. The kind of script you see on forms filled out by people who still use a pen for everything. "Stop trying to pick the right door. There isn't one." I turned the note over. Blank. I put it under the old note in the drawer and shut the drawer like a person slamming a lid on something that is not alive. I started taking showers at odd hours, so the water noise would drown out any sound from the hall. I ate standing up. I slept in jeans sometimes because the idea of being caught in bed with my legs tangled in sheets, as someone stood on the other side of the door, made my skin crawl. Every knock in the building, even a light one 2 floors down, shot electricity down my spine. I wrote less in the notebook, and then more, and then everything. I wrote the smell of the hall when the downstairs door opened. I wrote the way the young neighbor's chair had tipped. I wrote his hands. I wrote my hands. I wrote a question at the top of a fresh page in thick letters, and it looked stupid and true. Who is waiting at my doorstep? I didn't know if I meant him or me. The next killing wasn't in our block. It was 2 streets over. A woman who ran a hair salon out of a storefront with pictures of updos in the window. She had propped the door open with a rubber wedge. She liked air. She liked people to feel invited. People said she always remembered names. People said she kept a jar of candy on the counter and told customers to take 2. She was found in the back room. The cash drawer was open. The 20 lay half out like a tongue. The wedge was still at the door. The cops came and went and came again. News vans parked halfway onto the sidewalk. For a few hours, the block felt televised. Then it didn't. I stopped going out after dark. It didn't matter. The texts started coming at midday. They were plain statements like weather. "Put your ear to the door. I'm downstairs, check your mailbox." I did and found nothing but a catalog and a newsletter from a councilman who had never seen our steps. Then one afternoon, "Let him in." I didn't know who he meant until someone knocked. A quick, familiar rhythm. Not a stranger's knock. It was the cop with the round face. I opened. He stepped inside and looked around with the expression of a man who walks into rooms for a living and knows they all hold the same sort of hopes. "We're doing canvas," he said. Asking again, "Anything new?" I showed him the second key. I showed him the spiral note. I did not show him the basement in words, but I think he felt something, because he touched the wall near the vent with his fingertips like a doctor pressing for a pulse. "Do you have somewhere else you can stay?" he asked. "No," I said. It wasn't exactly true. I could have called a friend and slept on a couch and listened to someone else's fridge and someone else's pipes. But I knew the person waiting would wait there too. He felt portable. He felt like a rule, not a man. "Lock up tight," the cop said. He stood like he didn't want to go because walking away from a problem sometimes makes it move. "We'll get him." The text started again after the cop left, timed like a reply to a conversation I hadn't initiated. He looks at doors for a living. He still opens them. I went to the window. The cop stood on the steps, wrote something in his pad, looked up and down the street, then reached for the latch as if he had forgotten which way the lock turned. It happens. The latch sticks. He put a shoulder into it like anyone would. The figure slid out from the gap behind the mailboxes the way water finds a path under a door. I pounded on the glass. It made no sense. The cop was right there. The figure was 2 steps below, moving in that flat, steady way. Not a run, not a sneak, just a determined walk. The cop turned his head, puzzled, and in that second the hooded man went up, weighed under the cop's center, and the two of them went into the stairwell wall. There was a dull impact, a body sound, a breath knocked out. The cop went down, hands curling, legs wrong. I don't want to put any more words on it. There is a line. I won't cross it here. It was brutal in the plain way. A fall is brutal when the angle is exactly the worst one. The hooded man lifted, set, and then did the part that made it murder and not accident. It was fast and purposeful, and without struggle. Not drawn out. Efficient like removing a nail. I was down the stairs before I knew it, yelling, "Nothing useful." The hooded man didn't run. He stepped back into the gap and was gone, the building swallowing him like a person swallows a cough in a church. I knelt by the cop and said his name, which I had learned from the card but hadn't used. It sat wrong in the air now. It didn't change anything. His eyes stared at a place past the ceiling. I don't know if he heard me. Neighbors opened doors and closed them. Someone called emergency, voice high, as if the pitch could change the outcome. I pressed my hands where training videos tell you to press. There was so much wrong with what lay under them. After a while, I heard the siren that says you were right to be afraid. Then strangers pushed me aside and did the work I had pretended I knew. They couldn't turn anything back. I went upstairs with hands that weren't clean. I stood in my doorway and waited for a text that didn't come. I waited until it did. Now you know what a doorstep costs. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and slid to the floor and kept glowing. I picked it up and scrolled back through the messages as if reading them in order would reveal a trick in the grammar. There wasn't one. It was simple. He knocked. We opened. We paid. The building changed after the cop. Cops in pairs on the block. Lights at night. People walked in groups to the corner and then split off one by one like a school of fish. The landlord finally put a camera in the stairwell, a cheap one that made everything look gray and respectable. He made a show of changing the downstairs lock. He hired a guy to sand the blood out of the wood. The guy worked with his jaw clenched and didn't look anyone in the eye. I moved my chair back under the doorknob for a while. I hated it, and I did it anyway. I slept on the floor sometimes because I couldn't stand the idea of my bed being the last thing I had seen. If the door opened at the wrong moment, I kept the keys on the table and the notebook open. I started to plan, which is the same thing as starting to accept that you live inside the rule. I went downstairs in daylight and found the gap behind the mailboxes. It looked like nothing from one angle, just a crooked shadow. From another, it was a slit in the wall wide enough to turn sideways and slide through. I put my arm in. A draft moved over my skin. There was no light. I took it back out and wiped dust on my jeans like that would erase the feel. That night I left my door unlatched and sat on the couch with the lights off and my phone in my hand. The house creaked like it does when it warms. I waited until I felt the thing I had started to recognize. Attention. Not mine. The buildings. The air. The way the noise of the street quieted around my section of the block like hands cupped around a flame. I texted him. Come up. The dots appeared and went away. I stood, set the phone face up on the table, and stepped into the hall. I didn't take a knife. I didn't take the key. I left everything where it was because I didn't want props. I wanted to know if I was going to stand or run when the door across the hall opened. It did. A hinge ticked. The young neighbor's place was empty now, taped and closed, but the tape had been peeled and stuck back like a person pretending to clean a cut. The dark inside felt staged. I stepped to the threshold. Enough, I said. My voice shook. I'm right here. The hooded man didn't step out. He spoke from inside, very near. You're ready, he said. Good. For what? I asked. To stop hiding behind not deciding, he said. To pick. I won't be you, I said. You already are, he said. You've been somebody's knock forever. You just didn't count the cost. Take off the hood, I said. Why? He asked. So I can remember your face, I said. When I give it to them. He reached up. He didn't make a show of it. He pulled the hood back and took off the cap. He was younger than I wanted. Early 30s, maybe. Regular. I'd seen his face in the grocery store 100 times, on the bus, in the reflection in dark glass, when you look past yourself at the person behind you. A small scar near the eyebrow, like a cut that didn't deserve stitches but got them anyway. Eyes a color you don't bother naming. He smiled without showing teeth. You won't give them a face, he said. You'll give them a story. They'll write it down in their little pads. It won't help. You killed a cop, I said. He shrugged, tiny, like a man acknowledging bad weather he didn't make. He opened. You knocked, I said. I waited, he said. You're the one who opened your door and let me all the way in. Nobody makes you do that part. Not me. Not anyone. Why me? I heard myself ask again, tired of my own voice. He tilted his head. Because you're at the point where stepping over isn't working for you anymore, he said. Because you know the difference between looking and seeing. Because if I hand it to you, you'll either throw it away or carry it. And I'm curious which. What is it? I asked. He stepped forward and put something on the floor between us. Not a key. A phone. Cheap. Burners like that are in the news. He nodded toward it. It rings when it's time, he said. You'll be at a door. You'll decide. I won't do it, I said. He smiled that small smile again. You already did. He meant the neighbor. He meant the pause in the hall with my hand lifted and lowered, the chain set and not set, the 2 minutes I took to go get my phone. He meant the way I measured the room before helping. He meant the way I put the key in the sink and took it out. He meant the line I had crossed 20 small times. He stepped back into the dark and left me with the phone at my feet like a dog he didn't want. I picked it up. I told myself I'd take it to the police. I told myself I'd hand them this thing and stand there while they opened it with their tools and found the numbers and the times and the places. I put it in the drawer with the notes for one night because it was late, and in the morning I'd go. In the morning, I looked at it and closed the drawer. That is how the worst choices happen, not with a thought, but with a delay. It rang 2 days later. No ringtone, just a vibration that moved along the wood like a bug. I took it out. The screen showed a single word: now. I stood in the kitchen with the cheap phone in my hand and the good one face up on the table like two versions of me having a staring contest. I put the burner in my pocket. I don't know why. That's not true. I do. I wanted to end it, and I had decided an ending had to happen at the doorstep, not on someone else's schedule. That's another lie we tell ourselves, that endings belong to us. I walked down to the basement. The door to 12 opened with the old key like before. The room felt colder. The chair had been moved 6 inches. The kind of change you see with your body before your eyes catch up. He wasn't there. On the table, another note in the neat hand. You won't fix the rule by breaking one link. You fix it by refusing your turn. I tore the note, and the sound in the cold room sounded like a flag. I sat in the chair he had used and I waited. The cheap phone vibrated again. I answered and said nothing. His breath made a quiet sound in the speaker. This is where you decide, he said. Not the basement. The door. Whose? I asked. Yours, he said. Let me in. I stood up so fast the chair legs snicked. No, I said. I have something better. What? He said, flat, like a teacher. Come in, I said. Come all the way in. No more steps, no more waiting. Me and you here. I lock the door. We see what happens. He was quiet. I imagined him in the stairwell, head tilted, that tiny smile that said he didn't believe anyone could change the rhythm. You think you'll win if we make it a room instead of a threshold, he said, cute. Are you afraid to? I asked. It felt like a weak gambit. I said it anyway. I don't do rooms, he said. Rooms tell the truth. Doors tell stories. We're telling a door story. I put the phone down and looked at the keys on the table. Old one, new one, different cuts, same number. An idea came not as a thought, but as a shape. A door that is yours and not yours at the same time. A place where both rules meet. The upstairs neighbor was dead. Across the hall was taped. My door was mine. Everyone else's door was their life. There was one other door I had a claim on. The ground floor unit. It was supposed to be empty. The landlord said he was renovating. He was not. The gap behind the mailboxes led behind that door. If I could set the rules there, even for 1 minute, maybe I could put him on the wrong side of what he loves. I went down. The downstairs door groaned like a complaint when I pushed it. I left it open wide enough to make a promise. I went back up. I left my own door open too. 3 inches. I set the chair quietly under the knob and moved it a hair so the leg pressed against the jamb. I turned off the lights and sat on the floor where I could see both doors if I leaned. The cheap phone sat on my knee like a small animal. It vibrated. I'm here. Come in. I texted back. No reply. Footsteps on the stairs, the kind that pretend to be casual. A shadow passed across my threshold and paused. He breathed, quiet. He didn't push the door. He wanted me to. He always wanted me to. I'm not opening, I said, loud enough to carry through the wood. You come in. He waited. Waiting was his talent. He could let the time do the hurting. I pictured him, hood up, cap brim down, hands loose at his sides, smiling that small smile to himself, confident that the weight of silence would tip me. I felt my palms sweat. I counted my breaths. I thought of Maya laughing at something small, a coin dropping into a machine. I thought of the young neighbor humming. I thought of the cop's little pad and the slow way he read. I thought of the hairdresser's jar of candy. I stood and put my hand flat on the door. Last chance, I said. Room or nothing. He exhaled, one syllable of annoyance without a word in it, and his weight came into the wood. The chair leg bit harder into the jamb. The door held. He pushed again. The chain rattled even though I had taken it down months ago. Your brain supplies old sounds when it's scared. Fine, he said, and the word had that flat tone that meant he was changing the move. Footsteps away from my door, down the stairs, light, fast. The open downstairs door was waiting. The gap behind the mailboxes was waiting. I followed, quiet, staying one turn behind because he was better at this, and I knew it. He slid through the gap and into the dark, and this time I went after him. The walls scraped my shoulder. Dust filled my nose. The passage bent where the stairwell switches sides. It opened into the small square behind the ground floor unit. The door stood cracked like I had left it. Inside, the dark was thicker. My eyes adjusted and found him at the far side of the room, not moving. He had misread the shape. He had not expected me to be where he is strongest. Close it, I said. I had my hand on the inside knob. He shook his head. If you won't, I said, and I closed it. The latch caught. We were in a room together. He didn't like it. I saw it in the tiny shift of his shoulders. People who live on thresholds don't like rooms. In rooms, things stick to you. What now? He asked. We talk, I said. Or we don't. Either way, it ends here, or I end it. How? He asked. Calm again, but under it a note I hadn't heard. I didn't have a weapon. I had the metal folding chair in the corner. I had my hands. I had the fact that he was a man in a room for once. He took a step to the left like a boxer does to make you turn and set your feet wrong. I didn't move. He waited for me to breathe wrong. I held the breath until it hurt, and then let it out slow, because I didn't want to give him the sound of the timing. You're not the first, he said. You won't be the last. You stop me and someone else knocks. It's not me you fight. It's the door. Then be the only one I can reach, I said. He came fast, not the flat walk. A rush, 2 long steps. I had time to think one stupid thing. He finally chose. I swung the chair, not pretty, not cinematic, just a heavy object through air. It connected with his arm. The sound was a dull thud that my brain refused to make into anything precise. He staggered, not much, enough. We went down together, messy, bodies hitting concrete, air leaving lungs. My shoulder screamed. He was strong the way a patient man is strong, deliberate. He went for my throat. I tucked my chin. He tried to roll. I hooked a leg. It was not a good fight. It was two men in a room where no one was going to help. I've never been in a fight like that. Fights in school are all noise and quick separations. This was quiet and workmanlike and ugly. At one point his hand found my eye and I saw a burst of static. At another my knee found his ribs and his breath whistled. He wasn't talking now. I was making a sound I didn't want to hear. The chair was under us, or beside us, or nowhere. The old table leg dug into my back. He made a mistake. He tried to stand before he had me. I hooked his ankle and we went down again, his head close to the edge of the table. I grabbed the table and pulled, and the table slid, and his head met the corner in a way that didn't sound like wood or flesh. Exactly. But an ugly combination. He went soft for half a second. I didn't want to put words to what I did next. It involved the chair and the corner and purpose. I did it until he stopped trying to move me off him. Then the quiet returned all at once and had weight. I crawled away and sat against the wall and tasted iron and dust. He lay on the floor with his hood half off and his cap crooked. I waited for him to move. He didn't. I watched his chest for the rise. It didn't. I kept watching until the not moving became more real than any moving could be. I don't know how long I sat there. The cheap phone lay face down on the concrete. I picked it up and stared at my face reflected in the black. Something in my head said, "Call, it was time to act like the kind of person I had not been." I used my own phone. I said the words this time, not the soft ones. People came. They opened doors. They brought light and questions. And the formal steps death demands I told the truth. But not all of it. Because some of it made no sense, even as I said it aloud. They found the gap behind the mailboxes. They measured it. They put tape up like a bandage on a throat. They asked me to sit. They took pictures of my hands. They bagged the chair. Someone put a blanket around my shoulders, and I hated it and kept it on. They asked who he was. I said I didn't know. That was true. He had a wallet with nothing in it worth knowing. No cards, no ID, no photos. Cash folded neatly with an odd short bill stuck in the middle as if he liked patterns. They showed me his face again in clean light, and it was no one I could name. The kind of face that only becomes visible in a story. The cop with the round face didn't get to hear it. Another one wrote in a small pad and read the way he had, slow, lips moving. They tied what they could to him. Phone records, the texts, the way he had been within range of the places before. They said there might be others. They said the word closure to me, and I nodded like it meant something. People brought sandwiches. They put them on the table like offerings at a shrine I didn't pray at. I slept a little. People I barely knew texted me. A reporter left a card in my mailbox. I threw it away and then took it back out and threw it away again properly. For 2 days, nobody waited at my doorstep. The porch light clicked on at dusk and off at dawn. The steps kept their dust. I swept them, and the broom made a good sound against the concrete, regular and simple. On the third day, there was a key on the mat. Not one of his, not the old kind or the new. It was brass, heavy, professionally cut, with a stamped address that wasn't mine. A tag read a street 2 neighborhoods over, Unit 12. A. I stared at it until the stamped letters stopped making words. I checked the hallway cameras the landlord had installed. They showed nothing at my door except me picking up the key and holding it like a small animal I wasn't sure how to comfort. There was a note with it. Spiral edge. Neat hand. Not his. It read, "You can throw this away, or you can bring it to me. I'm at the address on the tag. I'll be waiting at my doorstep. I want to talk about Maya." A name at the bottom. Not a landlord. Maya's sister. I stood very still. The house was quiet. The gap behind the mailboxes had plywood over it now. The downstairs door had a new lock. The porch light worked. All the visible things were fixed the way city workers paint new lines on the street after an accident. I took the note inside and sat with it, and the key on the table between my hands. I thought about what doors mean, and about how this started with footprints in dust. I could have ignored if I had been a different person. I thought about the ridiculous list I had made in my notebook, like a kid drawing a map home. I thought about how many people had died because someone opened, and how we still have to open because that's how we live. I took the key to the police first. I handed it to a detective who looked like he had been awake for a month. He took it and logged it and said they'd contact the woman on the note and make it official. I walked home after that with empty hands and could feel the shape of the key in the air beside me, like a missing tooth you keep touching with your tongue. That night, the cheap phone vibrated, even though the man who had owned it was in a drawer in a room I didn't want to think about. I had forgotten to give them the burner, I don't know why. That's not true. I do. Part of me thought I needed it to know if there were others, if the rule had deputies. I looked at the screen. A single message with no number attached, just text. "We don't end. We wait." I typed back, "I'm done. 3 dots. Then, we'll see." I turned the phone off. I took the battery out because I remembered you can do that with cheap ones. I slid the parts into a plastic bag and put it in the freezer like that would put the rule to sleep. The next morning my door had a shadow, not a person. An envelope taped at eye level. I tore it down. Inside was a photo of my door from across the street. In the window of the second floor across the way, a shape, grainy, hood up the back of a cap. I looked at the date mark in the corner. It was from 3 weeks ago. He had been watching me watch the door. He had been watching me watch nothing and call it a small victory. On the back of the photo, the neat hand again. Not his. Maya's sister. He watched all of us. We watch back now. I don't know if that's comfort. I don't know if turning a door into a camera makes it less a door. I put the photo in the drawer with the notes and the burner parts and the keys that no longer open anything I want to enter. Some nights I sit by the door and listen to the building's breath, and I don't know which side of the wood I belong on. I don't knock. I don't open for unknown voices. I look through the peephole like a fool and see the railing and the mailbox flag and the top step, and the small world you can see when you're afraid. I also buy flowers and put them in a jar and take them to the laundromat gate and stick them there. And sometimes I talk to the plants in the window box the way Maya did, and I don't care if anyone hears. I say names. I try to remember them all. Some afternoons I go to the address on the tag on the key I gave away. I don't go up. I stand across the street with my hands in my pockets. A woman comes and goes. She looks like Maya and doesn't once. She caught me watching. She lifted her chin like a person who won't step aside. She didn't wave. I didn't. We're careful, and we're tired. We both keep our doors locked. We both open anyway when it's someone we love. That's the rule. That's what he wanted to prove. It doesn't matter if he's gone. The rule remains. Who is waiting at my doorstep? Sometimes it's a delivery I forgot I ordered. Sometimes it's a neighbor with a package for me that got misdelivered. Sometimes it's nobody and I still feel watched. Once it was a kid selling candy for a school trip. I bought 2 bars and told him to go home before dark, and hated myself for saying it like that changes anything. The other night, late, a knock came that didn't sound like his. Bossy knocks and nervous knocks and old lady with hands full of groceries knocks all sound different. This one was a thin, uncertain rattle of bone on wood. I put my eye to the hole. A man stood there in a suit that had tried. His hair had given up in the heat. He held a folder against his chest like a shield. He looked like a man forced to go door to door by a job he needed. I should have pretended I wasn't home. I opened because I am me. "Evening," he said, and showed me a badge that did not belong to the police. "City office. We're making sure your staircase exits are to code. 10 minutes?" I stared at the badge. I stared at his face. It looked like paper left in a pocket and put through the wash. He looked tired. He looked like he'd been told that if he did this and didn't make anyone mad, things might loosen in his life. I nodded. I let him in. He stepped over the threshold and glanced at the chain stub, the dents in the jamb, the extra plates on the locks. He took a small pen from behind his ear and clicked it. "I'll be quick," he said. "Take your time," I said, and I meant it. That's the worst part. I meant it both ways. I watched him go down the hall. I watched him check the smoke detector with a little can that puffs air. He coughed a laugh and said, "These always go off when they shouldn't, and never when they should." And I didn't tell him about the downstairs door, or the gap behind the mailboxes, or the rule. He left. I locked up after him. I stood with my forehead against the wood for a while and counted my breaths. There are footprints sometimes, not every morning. Enough. They face the door. They wait. I sweep them up. I leave the porch light on. I talk to the plants. I write in the notebook. Less I live. I don't know if that's the brave thing or the foolish one. Maybe it's both. The cheap phone is still in the freezer in pieces. Sometimes I open the drawer and look at it and imagine the kind of person who will take a job for the city that makes him go door to door. Sometimes I imagine a kid selling candy at the worst hour. Sometimes I imagine nothing, and the nothing has a face. When I walk home from the bar where I finally let my friends drag me, I look at each house and each narrow porch and each green door with deadbolts that don't line up. I see people do what they have to do. Lift and pull at the same time. Put their shoulder in. Swing. Step in. Lock behind them. I see the way they glance over their shoulder without meaning to. I see what we are. We are a species that opens. So I open when it's time. I try to be careful. I try not to step over everything that isn't mine. I listen at the door and decide if I am who I think I am. Sometimes I hear my name, close and soft, like someone speaking to me from the other side with their mouth near the wood. I don't answer that voice. I sit down on the floor instead and wait him out, whoever he is that night. Memory, habit, rule, man. The waiting hurts. I practice anyway. There is no neat ending. There is this: a doorstep, a key that fits, a key that doesn't, the sound of a knob turning easily under a stranger's hand, The sound of your own voice saying, "Who is it?" Because that's the only sentence we have that holds both fear and hope at once. There is this too. Sometimes you open, and it's a neighbor with half your mail and a slice of cake on a paper plate, and you are glad you answered, and the relief feels like a clean shirt. Sometimes you don't open, and the knocking goes away, and you add that little victory to the list in your head. And sometimes you open, and it's the rule itself, and you have to decide what you believe in more, rooms or thresholds. I know my answer today. I know it might change. If you're reading this to find out the trick, there isn't one. There's a door. There's you. There's the person on the other side who might be anyone. There's what it costs to find out. Tonight the porch light clicks on. The concrete sweats a little. A moth taps the glass of the fixture and quiets. I sit with my back to the door, and my knees up, and the notebook closed, and the plants in their boxes breathing out the green smell that plants make when they're watered enough, and not too much. There's a scuff on the top step that won't wash away. There are faint prints in dust that could be mine or yours, or his. And there is the question that brought all of this into being and refuses to leave. I don't write it down anymore. I don't have to. Who is waiting at my doorstep? I breathe. I listen. I live with the answer I don't have. I open when I must. And when I do, I stand back from the frame, keep my hands free, and look the person in the face, whoever they are, and try to choose the kind of life that doesn't spill blood for an easy quiet, even when the quiet is all I want.